Origin and history. After the Roman conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, the Vulgar Latin replaced virtually all local languages. In the territories along the Atlantic coast, it gradually evolved in what is technically known Galician Portuguese language. Later, following the incorporation of Galicia into Spain and the independent development of Portugal, this language split in Galician and Portuguese branches. Reading materials in Portuguese date from a property agreement of the late 12th century, the so-called Auto de Partillas, and literary works appeared in the 13th and 14th centuries. Standard Portuguese is based on the dialect of Lisbon. Dialectal variation within the country is not great, but Brazilian Portuguese varies from European Portuguese in several respects, including several sound changes and some differences in verb conjugation and syntaxes. For example, object pronouns occur before the verb in Brazilian Portuguese, as in Spanish, but after the verb in Standard Portuguese. Dialects. The four major dialect groups of Portuguese are Northern Portuguese or Galician, Central Portuguese, Southern Portuguese, including the dialect of Lisbon, and Insular Portuguese, including Brazilian and Madeiran. Portuguese. Portuguese is a Romance language spoken in Portugal, Brazil, and Portuguese colonial and formerly colonial territories: Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, São Tomé, Goa, Macau, and Timor. Galician, spoken in northern Spain, is often considered a dialect of Portuguese. The mother tongue Portuguese is spoken by more than 230 million people, as we can see in the graph. Population, where Portuguese is an official language, in millions. Brazil with 191.9 millions, Mozambique with 21.3, Angola with 12.5, Portugal 10.6, Guinea-Bissau with 1.5, its Timor with 1.1, Cape Verde with 0.4, and São Tomé and Príncipe with 0.2. And is listed as the seventh most spoken language in the world, the third most spoken European language, and the major language of the Southern Hemisphere. External history of the Portuguese language, the Romance period. When the Romans invaded the peninsula in 218 BC, the people living in the region adopted the Vulgar or Common Latin, the Romance colloquial language. A further stage in the linguistic development as the Romans, a language representing an intermediate stage between Vulgar Latin and modern West Romance languages, which include Portuguese, Spanish, French, Galician, and Occitan. From 409 AD to 711, the Portuguese vocabulary adopted many new words used by invading Germanic tribes. Among these were roubar, to steal, guerrear, to wage war, and branco, white. The effects of Germanic migrations of the spoken language was not uniform and broke the linguistic uniformity of the peninsula. Over a period of time, this rupture led to a differentiation of the regional languages.
Beginning in 711, when the Moors conquered the Iberian Peninsula, Arabic became the official language. Although the vast majority of the population continued to speak Romance, Arabic words that entered the Portuguese language during the Moor occupation included
Arroz,
rice,
alface,
lettuce,
alicate,
pliers, and
referem.
or hostage. The period between the 9th century, when Latin Portuguese documents first appeared, and the 11th century is considered one of linguistic transition. a few Portuguese words appear in local Latin texts, but Portuguese, more specifically the Galician Portuguese, and its forerunner were only spoken in Lusitania. The Galician Portuguese language. When Christians started to reconquer the peninsula in the 11th century, the Arabs were expelled to the south, where the contact between the Romance and Arabic created the Mozambique dialects. The Galician Portuguese became the spoken and written language of Lusitania. The first regional official documents and literary texts were not in Latin and were written in the Galician Portuguese language. These included the
Cancioneiros da Ajuda da Vaticana and Coloci Brancuti,
collections of medieval poems, and now in the Lisbon's National Library. As the Christians advanced southward, the northern dialects interacted with the Mozambique dialects of the south, producing a Portuguese language which was different from the Galician Portuguese language. The separation between the Galician and Portuguese languages, which began with Portugal's independence in 1185, was consolidated after the Moors were expelled in 1249 and also by the defeat in 1385 of the Castilians, who sought unsuccessfully to conquer Portugal. The literary prose in Portuguese appeared in the 14th century with
Crónica Geral de España
in 1344 and
Libro de Linganes,
Book of Lineages by Dom Pedro Alfonso, Count of Barcelos.
Archaic Portuguese. Between the 14th and 16th centuries, when Portugal established an overseas empire, the Portuguese language was heard in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Under regional influences, it absorbed words like
Hangada,
raft, of Malay origin, and
Cha,
tea, of Chinese origin. During the Renaissance, the inclusion of Italian expressions as well as erudite Greek words made Portuguese a more complex and malleable language. The publication of
Cancioneiro Geral de Garcia de Rasende
in 1516 marked the end of this period of consolidation in which archaic Portuguese was used.
Modern Portuguese. Portuguese entered its modern phase in the 16th century when the first grammars defined Portuguese morphology and syntax. When Luís de Camões wrote
Os Lusíadas
in 1572, the language was already close to its current structure of phrases and morphology. From then on, linguistic changes have been minor. When Portugal was under the domination of Spain from 1580 to 1640, Castilian words such as
Bobo,
which means fool, and
Granizo,
or hail, were absorbed into the language. French influence during the 18th century changed the Portuguese spoken language in the homeland, making it different from the Portuguese spoken in the colonies. During the 19th and 20th centuries, the Portuguese vocabulary absorbed new contributions. Words of Greco-Latin origin reflecting technological advances were added to the language. Such words included
automóvel,
car, and
televisão,
television. This was followed by English technical words from medical, astronautical, and computer sciences, such as checkup and software.
The onrush of new words led to creation in 1990 of a commission of representatives of the various Portuguese-speaking countries. Its goal was to create an uniform technical vocabulary and avoid the confusion that was occurring when different words were used to describe the same objects.
Portuguese. Portuguese is part of the Indo-European language family, which means it's very closely related to Spanish. Portuguese is spoken by 180 million people worldwide, but mainly in Brazil and Portugal. Brazilian, or BP, and European, or EP, Portuguese differ in terms of pronunciation, spelling, and vocabulary more so than British English and American English. The alphabet of Portuguese consists of 23 letters. The Portuguese alphabet does not have letters such as K, W, or Y like it does in English. In Portuguese, there are 11 letters with diacritics, which is a small symbol, and the punctuation is very similar to English. Students learning English will have little difficulty in learning the English writing system. The phonology of Portuguese is it is a stressed time language. Brazilian Portuguese, on the other hand, is a syllable-timed language. In Portuguese, there are 9 vowel sounds, 6 diphthongs, and 19 consonant sounds. That means that there's less in English, meaning that there will be fewer consonant clusters in Portuguese. Pronunciation problem areas for English language learners. Students of Portuguese who are learning to speak English may fail to distinguish minimal pairs such as rich and reach, pack, puck, or head, had. They might also find difficulty in hearing the inaudibility of unstressed vowels at the end of the word. For example, they might say part for party. They might also include vowel sounds before, between, or following consonants. They might say a strap for strap, or montes for months. They might also nasalize the final M or N sound in words. For example, ran might become rang. There are also other expected problems with words such as then, think, or breathe. They might also have problems discriminating between words such as pig and big, or gale and kale. They might also substitute ear for hear, or high for eye. When talking about Portuguese grammar, there are some similarities and some differences to English. Some similarities is that they contain many of the same verb system features that are similar to English. One of the differences is that interrogatives in Portuguese are conveyed by intonation. For example, it leads to you like me, or he came to school yesterday. Another difference is that Portuguese also uses the double negative more so than in English. Tense choice is a significant problem for most English language learners. It is clear that advanced students will struggle, for example, to choose the correct tense to talk about the future, or to choose between the present perfect simple and the present perfect continuous. At a less advanced level, the main area of difficulty lies in the choice of having appropriate present tense. Mistakes in this area include he has a bath, which really they're trying to say he's having a bath. She is knowing, for she knows. And it ages since I don't play tennis. Or, it's been ages since I have played tennis. Beginners also make errors using modal verbs. Sentences such as I must go now are common. Portuguese word order is a little bit more flexible than that of English. There are variations between the two languages in placement of adjectives, adverbials, or pronouns, and in syntax of sentences containing indirect speech. However, basic Portuguese sentence structure is similar to that of English, so learners have no difficulty expressing their ideas comprehensively. English prepositions are difficult for Portuguese learners since their own language has far fewer, and there is no simple correspondence between those that exist in English and Portuguese and their English equivalents. Possessive pronouns. Secondly, there is a single possessive pronoun for his, her, which agrees in the gender in the term that it's possessed. This can lead to ambiguity in sentences such as, she's having lunch with his brother, meaning her brother. Personal pronouns, especially direct object pronouns, are often omitted in Portuguese, which gives to mistakes such as I told, which they were trying to say I told him. Thirdly, there's only one question tag in Portuguese, in contrast to English, which has several different ones depending on the tense and formation of opening words. Errors, such as she's coming tomorrow, isn't it, are the common. The vocabulary of Portuguese. Because of shared Latin roots, there are many English-Portuguese cognates which can often facilitate the acquisition of strong academic vocabulary. There is less overlap in everyday vocabulary of the two languages. Of course, there are some true cognates, and then there are also false cognates. Here's just a few of the many that wait to trap the Portuguese learner of English. Parents does not mean parientes, which is relatives. Familiar, familiar, respectable, local or local, really truly means place. A spelling reform in Portugal in 1911 made Portuguese spelling much more phonetic in order to help raise standards of literacy in the country. As with all learners whose native language is phonetic, Portuguese ELS students have significant problems spelling English words that they encounter first in spoken language and pronouncing words that they encounter first in written language. There are significant differences between European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese. European Portuguese has many words of Arabic origin, particularly for food items, and place names. In contrast, Brazilian Portuguese has many loan words from Native American language, especially geographical names, plants, and animals in American English. For example, here are some words in English and how they appear in Brazilian Portuguese and in European Portuguese. There are some pronunciation difficulties for English language learners. Portuguese speakers may have difficulties with some of the following areas of pronunciation. The I or the E in reach, in rich, in heat, in hit, the short A and long A in cart and cat, the sound in man and men, a diphthong in you and full and fool, the R and S sound such as in rise and rice, the P and the B sound such as pig and big, the K and G sounds such as Kate and gate, and many other consonant clusters.
Portuguese cultural norms. Portugal, as with many countries, is becoming more modernized. It is also important to remember that, like the United States, there are different parts of the country. However, overall, it is still very patriarchal and hierarchical in nature, especially in many mainland areas. Family is extremely important to the Portuguese people. Even though it is still patriarchal, the mother is often viewed as the anchor of the family. Most people are heavily influenced by the Catholic Church. Many holidays, festivals, and some laws are derived from Roman Catholic precepts. It is not uncommon to find religious symbols displayed in public buildings. For many, quote-unquote, to be Portuguese is to be Catholic. Portuguese people value sharing food. They don't eat lunch in front of a computer screen. They are very social. Portuguese people tend to be more traditional and conservative. They are more formal. Dress is quite formal in urban areas. Dressing down displays a lack of respect for social rules. Obedience is valued in children. They are expected to have good manners and to be respectful to adults. Portuguese communication style. People from the mainland or continent are thought to speak proper Portuguese. Everything else is considered slang. Tone and volume can come across to non-native speakers as loud, harsh, and even mean. This does not indicate anger. Confrontation is not desirable. Translation to English can sometimes come across as rude. Mainland Portuguese speakers are very direct and quick to share an opinion. Taking turns to speak is not the norm. Children are generally shielded from adult conversations. There are topics that children should not ask about. Making eye contact with adults is considered disrespectful. Personal space is not emphasized as it is in America. Silence between people is more acceptable. Touching is not avoided. Younger students kiss their teachers. Considerations for the classroom. Teachers are regarded as authority figures. Parents defer to the teacher regarding their child. They are less likely to attend parent-teacher conferences. This does not mean they do not care. Portuguese parents may give elaborate background information before answering a question. Parents may feel obligated to excuse their children from school for religious reasons. Tips for teachers with Portuguese English language learners. First, Portuguese people value cooperative learning experiences. Second, continue to develop the student's first language in order to facilitate learning. Third, explicitly teach English word order since it differs from Portuguese. Fourth, explicitly teach phonological differences between the languages. Fifth, English prepositions may be difficult for these learners. Sixth, teach cognates for strong vocabulary development. Seventh, watch for negative transfer with interrogatives and use of double negatives. Eighth, consider letting students write phonetically. Ninth, provide translation for parents. And lastly, and probably the most important thing I learned, is to contact and welcome the parents to the school.